Okay, hi. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Atlanta Council. Thanks very much for coming. I'm Steve Grundman. I'm the Director of Emerging Defense Challenges here at the Atlanta Council. I'm also the producer of this series we call Captains of Industry. Our purpose today is to hear from three chief executives, Brad Feldmann of Cubic Corporation, Andy Hove of AM General, and Barbara Humpton of Siemens Government Technologies. They will comprise a panel that I will moderate, and we will discuss how their companies, and more generally this as I call it, narrow band of big, small companies in general, how they address the public interests that their companies serve and the public policies that shape their markets. Thank you very much, lady and gentlemen, for doing this for all of us. I appreciate it. Before I proceed, there are a small handful of administrative notes to make to keep everybody on track and in order. First, the agenda, which is pretty straightforward. The 75 roughly minutes, actually we'll plan to go until 6 o'clock, that we have available to us will be in three segments. Myself and then momentarily my friend Frank Finelli will make some introductory remarks in section one. The panel will join me on the stage for a conversation in section two that'll last a half hour or so. And then indeed I will reserve about 20 minutes at the end of the 75-minute window for taking questions from the audience. So have questions, please. Hold them. I'll signal when we're about to go, and I know the panel will welcome questions from the audience. We also are tweeting, or I guess as it's called, live tweeting. Maybe there isn't any other kind of tweeting. The event over the hashtag AC Defense. And for those of you, for that matter, in the room, let alone watching on that live stream, who may want to offer a question over Twitter, please do. Our staff will take a look at it, and if it's a good question, they'll slip me a piece of paper, and I can interject those questions launched over Twitter in the Q&A part of the discussion. Second, or maybe I'm up to third at this point, I want to emphasize this is a public on-the-record event. The panelists know this, but it has a little bit of significance for the rest of you in the audience as well. If I call upon you when we are in the Q&A portion, please wait for the microphone to get into your hands, identify yourself and where you're from before asking your question. Finally, and as I've already said, we're going to plan to end the event at 6 o'clock, and we ought to keep to that discipline. So this event today marks no less than the 18th event in this series, the purpose of which is to make available to what I modestly regard as this town's preeminent platform from which senior executives whose businesses address aerospace defense and government services can address the public interests their companies serve and the public policies that shape these markets. Besides the fact of my admiration for each of these panelists and the achievements of their companies, which is true, the particular impetus for this event concerns exactly what is indicated in this admittedly cheeky title, which I have not yet invoked: Big Small Companies, How Size Matters in Defense Contracting. The industrial structure of defense, it has been observed, hardly only by me, has been transformed over the past quarter century. Back at the end of the Cold War, the industrial base was mostly comprised of mid-scale brands. Maybe there are many of you in the room too young to remember Lockheed, just Lockheed, Northrop, FMC, Ingalls, to name three brands made famous in the Cold War, but which over time have been subsumed into one end of what in the modern structure of the industry we might call a barbell. So now, 25 years after a substantial restructuring of that Cold War legacy, industrial legacy, we have a structure in which we observe a concentration of very large, diversified companies at one end, juxtaposed against a diffusion of small and even micro-scale specialty subcontractors at the other. Neither of those is the particular interest of this discussion or the impetus for my holding this event. Instead, it's this, as I would call it, narrow band of big, small companies, an oxymoron that I think isn't yet apt. These are not small companies that these three executives represent. At the same time, they are quite distinct from those big diversified companies that do own the big brands in the aerospace, defense, and government services sector at this point. And so it's this narrow band of big, small companies, let's say with revenues, generally defense revenues of less than $2 billion, and that go to market with a relatively less diversified, frankly, a really kind of a tight portfolio of products and service offerings. That's the object of interest here, which I think is a conversation worth having because it's generally not had. I think this town has lots of conversations about small businesses and lots of conversations about the big diversified companies, but life in the middle, as we're going to explore, is different and also worth talking about. Okay, that's the end of what I might set out for context. I now have the great pleasure of introducing my friend Frank Finelli, so that he can begin the substantive portion of the dialogue. Don't get too ready, Frank. I'm going to make a brief introduction of you. Many of you know Frank, but nonetheless, I'll say he is a managing director at Carlyle, almost 20 years now at Carlyle. Frank and I first knew one another in the Pentagon at the end of his Army career. He had a distinguished Army career, which concluded with service on the Joint Staff, but also included tours through the 82nd Airborne, 1st Armored Division, Old Ironsides, and the 3rd Infantry Division, as well as a stint on the faculty at West Point. He also had worked for then Senator Dan Coates. So I'm pleased to have Frank here. If you all know the Carlyle Group, you know that there is an investment firm that spends a lot of time looking at big, small companies. And that was at least one of the reasons, among others, that I asked Frank to come and give a jump start to our conversation today. So thanks for coming, Frank.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. It really is great to be with you here this afternoon. And as you mentioned, I'm a managing director at the Carlyle Group. We have about $200 billion in assets and more than 250 portfolio companies around the world. We're a global private equity firm. And it really is great to be with you here as a member of the Atlantic Council. And as we get started, or at least before we get started, I would like to acknowledge and applaud Steve and his staff for the great work they do on this Captains of Industry series, which really, and other events as well, which really do set the Atlantic Council as a thought leader for the defense sector and the industry that supports it. So let's all give Steve and his team a hand.
Thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome. As Steve mentioned, I am an old soldier, and one of the key lessons I take away from my time in the Army is just how impactful leaders with vision can be. And in the military, that leader might be the chief of staff or a combatant commander who transform military capabilities. But it really is in the private sector that this lesson rings just as true. And you'll see that in the 3 CEOs who are with us here today. Simply put, there's a huge premium for gifted corporate leaders who can create value in their companies. And again, we're going to talk about that this afternoon. So first, we have Brad Feldmann in the publicly traded company from San Diego, Cubic. And Brad has done marvelous things expanding the scope and scale of his company through such things as the acquisition of Gator Technologies and what that did for their C4ISR sector, as well as initiatives in the transportation and training area, which set them on a course for record sales and backlog in 2017. Next, Andy Hove. In the privately held company from South Bend, Indiana, or Mishawaka, as the case might be, AM General. Again, they've expanded scope in areas beyond just being the OEM for 160,000 Humvees in the U.S. military to do such things as commercial manufacturing for the Mercedes R-Class that have really started to transform AM General as a global capability. And then third, Barbara Humpton, in the U.S. entity of one of the largest companies in the world, Siemens, going beyond the traditional boundaries of the services business to leverage the vast technologies available to it in Siemens Government Technologies in Western Virginia, in what she brings from the parent corporation in areas like smart infrastructure, secure energy, and the digital factory for automation. Fascinating initiatives we would love to learn more about. But furthermore, this premium on leaders with vision, I think, is even more important in the big smalls, as Steve has mentioned, because these mid-cap companies don't have the huge corporate staffs. They don't have these big development teams. They don't have the merry bands of consultants around all the time that can take care of everything. And so consequently, you have to be very, very good, and you have to be very, very focused about what you're going to do as a company if you want to succeed in the land of the bigs, those big 6 system integrators, or on the other side, the set-asides and those small businesses that are eating away at the bottom of the market. And so, again, this is a really neat part of the defense sector in particular, where this focus and the leadership of the CEOs becomes very, very important. So please indulge me for a couple minutes to tell you about the background of these folks. Brad Feldmann was a former Air Force officer who joined Cubic in 1989 for about 10 years, and then went on a bit of a sabbatical, I guess I could say, across the technical services industry, was the COO of Comtech Research, the Executive Vice President for BD and Strategy at Mantech, then the CEO of US Protect, and the Chief Operating Officer of Omniplex before returning to Cubic in 2008, ultimately becoming the President and CEO in 2014. And congratulations to you, Brad, on becoming Chairman of the Board just last February 19th. And then Andy Hove, who spent 11 years in the Army as a fellow Redleg. I'll ask you to have Andy show you the inside of his jacket here later, but Andy and I were fellow Redlegs, field artillerymen, before he joined United Defense, where he ran a joint venture in Turkey, and then ultimately the combat vehicles business, making a ton of money for Carlisle. We were delighted about that and the tremendous performance of you and your colleagues on that management team. Andy then transitioned to be the president of Oshkosh Defense, where they won the FMTV and the MATV award. Then went on for a short stint as the chief executive officer of Hunter Defense Technologies Global, before ultimately his role as the chief executive officer of AM General in December of 2015. And lastly, Barbara Humpton, who grew up in Lexington, Virginia, and her parents were both mathematics professors, and Barbara studied mathematics. So there's a great opportunity to ask her about STEM programs and what we can do on that here in America. Barbara's had an amazing career, really following corporate mergers and acquisitions. Started off, as I understand it, at IBM Federal, which was then acquired by L'Oreal, merged into Lockheed Martin, ultimately became the vice president for biometrics, critical infrastructure protection, and border security. And then she went to one of my favorite companies, Booz Allen Hamilton, another one that made a lot of money for Carlisle's shareholders, before joining in Siemens in 2011, ultimately rising to become the chief executive officer of the U.S. Government Technologies business in October 2015. So please join me in welcoming Steve and the super panel of CEOs leading these big, small companies to do great things. Thank you very much.
Barbara, you're right there. Frank, that could not have been better. I really appreciate that very much. Every part of it, including the beginning. Thank you. But it's the perfect. It is the perfect stage setting for all the things that we want to talk about here. So let's dive right into it. I've asked each of the panelists if they could start the conversation with a brief orientation to their companies and your general perspective on this big, small company problem and opportunity. And so rather than sustain the alphabetical sequence in which we've been talking about these speakers, we'll mix it up and start now with Barbara and down the line to the West Coast of San Diego. Barbara, get us started here.
Terrific.
Tell us about Siemens Government Technologies and your general perspective on life in the middle.
Hey, my favorite topic.
Great.
Siemens is the biggest, oldest company in the world. Some are bigger, some are older. No one is bigger and older than Siemens. And here's this amazing company built on innovation that is focused on the megatrends, the global megatrends that we're dealing with now: climate change, urbanization, just the aging population. And so it's a company with a portfolio that spans everything from power generation to the transmission and distribution into the actual infrastructure that consumes that energy, innovations in healthcare, et cetera. And the question you get to ask when you're the CEO of Siemens Government Technologies is, does U.S. government need any of that? And the answer is yes, a resounding yes. So the cool thing about being little in this big
small,
big, small, big, in this sector is that I get the chance to draw on the talent and innovation of 372,000 people around the globe in areas that the U.S. government needs to take advantage of global commercial capabilities. Who wants to spend their own money to invest in things like energy infrastructure? We can take advantage of the work that's already being done globally, apply that to the needs of the US federal government. And one more thing. This is an area that right now has been flourishing with private investment. So at a time when budgets have been so difficult in the past,
Yes, until a month ago.
The opportunity to actually take something like Naval Station Guantanamo Bay and do a fence-to-fence energy renovation, bringing in energy conservation measures and then on-site power generation, package that all up in a privately financed project such that the taxpayer doesn't pay a single dollar, and the government pays for it out of the savings from the utility bill. That's been the phenomenal opportunity that we've had. So here we are. I'll pause there. That's the portfolio we're dealing with, and we're in a middle where we're not competing with big aerospace and defense brand names, but what we are doing is bringing them best practices from the digitalization that is yet to come. So think about the digital shipyard of the future, where before anyone bends metal, they're going to simulate their end product using Siemens technology. Digitalization, the automation that precedes that, and the electrification that's the foundation for that, that's the strategy for Siemens.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's about, that's a good start. I actually will want to come back.
Enough?
Oh, it's perfect.
Okay.
It's perfect. It's like big, small, just perfect. Andy Hove, from the middle part of the country.
Top that.
I don't think I can, but I'll see what I can do.
It's not a competitive group.
Want a bet? So I'm not sure if you've heard of AM General. We are.
Let's assume we haven't, but go on.
We are known for our signature product, the Humvee. Here's some things you don't know about AM General. We have an automotive heritage that goes back over 100 years. We draw our legacy companies in military transport automotive is both Studebaker and Willys Jeep. That's where we draw our heritage from.
That's cool.
So 100 years worth of automotive experience. Actually, Studebaker took their first Army contract in 1857. So there's been, in the South Bend area, there's been an unbroken string of a company in the local South Bend area that's been doing military equipment for over 160 years now. So AM General is, we have the largest installed base of military vehicles in the world. We have over 260,000 of our products are still in service with over 70 countries. And despite rumors to the contrary, we are actually still in production on the Humvee. In fact, we produced more military vehicles last year than any military vehicle manufacturer in the world, in terms of total volume and quantity, which would surprise many folks. But the reason, the way we got there is AM General's had to become a global company that competes on a global marketplace. 80% of our military production last year went to countries outside of the U.S. Militaries outside of the U.S. 100% of our production for Mercedes went overseas. It was purpose built for the market in China. So AM General built a German luxury class SUV in Mishawaka, Indiana, in the heart of the country, with Local Union 5, which is the oldest currently active UAW local in the country, and exported every one of them to China.
This is one of those anecdotes to which I always am inclined to say, it's a global world.
It is, and so that's the key to our survival. We simply, as a big small company that doesn't have the protections of small businesses, and it doesn't have the scale and the heft of the really large businesses, you have to compete in the market a very different way, and you have to access the global market to be competitive and have longevity. Waiting for the budget to get sequestered or turned on and turned off with the U.S. government, we're just we would not be around if we didn't focus on that. So today, AM General is a specialized automotive business that focuses on design and development on the front end, especially manufacturing in the middle and sustainment long term. In fact, we're under contract today to design the next generation vehicle for the U.S. Postal Service, one of 5 companies that was selected for that competitive development program. So that's how we compete. It's as a big small company without the protections of a small business and the scale of a big business, it's sweat and tears, and just constant gardening every single day. And I've told my team the single best business development tool you can have in business this size is to execute on every program you have, cost, schedule, and performance, and we focus on that every single day.
Got to be good without mistake. Thank you, Brad Feldmann from
The West Coast.
From the West Coast.
Left Coast.
Yeah, that's it. Cubic is a publicly traded company. We do about $1.5 billion in revenue. The company was started in 1951 by my previous boss, Walter J. Zabel. He only ran the company for 61 years as the CEO, passed away a few years ago at the age of 97. Walter was a physicist from William and Mary. I'm not sure they had engineering degrees in those days. Walter also was extraordinarily fast as a runner, and he's an All-American tight end, and his name is placarded on the stadium at William and Mary. When he could run the 100-yard dash at the age of 75. He could run the 100-yard dash in about 10 flat. So he's pretty fast up until the end. So Walter built a very competitive company. We've done a lot of great things over the years, a lot of firsts over the years. Kind of what propelled the company in the early 70s, we were losing fighter pilots over Vietnam, and Walter and the team invented the Top Gun system. And so we've been involved with training fighter pilots in the United States and around the world since the early 70s, and we're very proud of that. We have a box on the Joint Strike Fighter, and that's terrific. The company, Walter was very much into conglomerate management, so we were in all kinds of different businesses. We've simplified the businesses over time. We are a technology company, and we're involved in 3 principal markets. One is a commercial market. We collect fares in major cities for mass transit. In the United Kingdom, North America, and Australia, we interact with 70% of all the people in those regions that use mass transit. We're very famous for the Oyster card. We put the system in New York, the system in Chicago. We have a fairly a market-leading position in those markets, and that it's growing, and we're very fortunate about that. The second market we've done recently through acquisition. We're focused on C4ISR. There's a lot of people in C4ISR. What we tried to do is find a niche that we thought was underserved where we could make money. So we've been focused. We've made a bet on full motion video. There's an insatiable appetite for full motion video post 9/11, and we've done a series of half a dozen acquisitions so that today we can provide full motion video on the edge with analytics. Soldiers can set it up in 15 minutes. Pretty extraordinary. The third piece of business came from the Top Gun business, and we provide training systems to militaries around the world. Today we're training fighter pilots in 35 countries. We're training armies in countries in 35 countries. We are the miles supplier for the United States Army as well as the Marine Corps. We put in combat training centers around the world. We have the Top Gun stuff as well. We also are involved in virtual simulation. In the simulation world, geeks talk about live virtual constructive simulation techniques. We have provided virtual courseware for the littoral combat ship, and today we're involved in combining all of those techniques. Modeling and simulation is actually an area where the government can save money. It turns out it costs a lot of money to fly every sortie. If you can synthetically create that adversary, if you will, you just saved a lot of money, and you can just kind of count. Cubic is very focused on being the market leader in whatever it does. We're not interested in blooding our nose against 8 other people. We're interested in winning against a few people. We make deep investments and work on innovation many years ahead of time. So the trick for us to survive is to develop new widgets ahead of time and influence customers to want that. Pretty easy to say, pretty hard to do.
Indeed.
Anyway, the company is very focused on innovation, and thanks for having me today.
Thanks very much. Even before I go to the next question I had, I just want to pull the thread, a thread that comes to my mind in listening to all three of you. I said that one of the natural strategies of smaller companies, big small companies, is to have a tightly focused portfolio. But listening to the three of you, I think that's wrong, or at least it's wrong in your instances. There's more diversity and deliberate diversity, not by happenstance, in your portfolios than I might have said, and I guess I'd ask you to comment upon that. Why, at least in your instances, is having a diverse portfolio of products and services and customers more important than I had presumed it to be in my little clause there? Well, why don't we start with the one that struck me as most diverse, right? Those of you who think of Cubic, as I might have,
sure.
Although I know better now, as a training systems company, when you are at Haymarket Station in London, would not realize that you're right in the thick of a big important business to Cubic. So diversification, even at your scale, counts. Is it by happenstance or strategic, or go ahead?
So surprisingly, there's actually common technologies in each of those 3 markets. So we provide instrumentation, whether it be payments or providing a state vector for someone on the training battlefield. We move that data via secure communications. We move that to the cloud or on-prem to get some insights. We use modeling and simulation or algorithms to refine the insights, and then we use big displays so that users can make better decisions. In all of what we develop, you'll find those technologies. We actually share engineers across the company. It turns out defense guys in some areas are smarter than transportation guys, and it turns out the things that we have to deliver involve all of those disciplines. I think what motivates us is where we can be the market leader. If we can't be the market leader, and of course sometimes you take a bet to get there, but if we can't be the market leader, we're not too interested in it. And so we've been fortunate to be involved in all of these markets, and things start out slow. We've been in London since 1978. It started out with a little pilot that we did, and it grew to where we are. In fact, it was announced we're the best supplier that Transport for London has, and we provide great capability there. So things start small, but
there's a thread. There's that technology thread.
Absolutely.
Solution thread. Andy, your portfolio is, and I thought I knew it, even more diverse than I thought. Well, again, is that deliberate? Is that under the gun of a Humvee program that we seem to think is at its end, even though it's not? Or what's the story there?
It's not really that complex. I mean, automotive is automotive,
Fair, right.
It's just a recognition of reality. And the U.S. Army, who has the biggest, ground vehicle fleet, only builds about somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 vehicles a year, all of them, light, medium, and heavy, all across the board. You compare that to commercial automotive and truck that probably builds 35 million units a year.
Right.
So who's leading automotive technology? It's not the DoD. And if you're not aware of what's going on in commercial automotive, you're going to be outside looking in. So it's just to even do our military business, which we're best known for, we have to be in commercial automotive as well. And from us, it's, we're not developing it from the bottom up automotive system technology. We're looking for the application of technologies to meet the needs of both our commercial and military customers, which tend to be specialized, right? Even on the commercial side, we're a niche market. So the common thread in all that is we don't sell vehicles to a mass consumer market. We don't have a few products to go to millions and millions of individual consumer customers. We have a very small set of customers. We have the U.S. Army, we have the U.S. Marine Corps, we have about 70 international customers, and then typically when we sell even a commercial item, we're selling it to a dealer, a master distributor, and that. So our core
market.
Yeah. So the common thread in all that sounds diverse, but what we view our core competency as is managing those deep relationships and understanding, what our customers need and how to take that entire abundance of automotive systems and technologies across the board and get them focused on what the customer needs. And it's for us, it's we do focus in areas that a lot of people don't focus in. I mean, for example, AM General builds probably the only remaining naturally aspirated, mechanically driven diesel engine in the world, right? Why is that important? We can't hack it, and you can't stop it dead in its tracks with an EMP blast or something else like that. Which, now that we're recognizing that, hey, we're back into, nation state, we're not even talking about near peer competitive threats. We're talking about peer threats that have advanced systems, and the electronic controls to get better fuel efficiency or embedded diagnostics are all great. We know how to do them. We can certainly apply them. They're extremely vulnerable in the military context, and frankly for a lot of commercial contexts as well. So we continue to innovate, but really by refreshing and continuing the expertise in getting the most out of simple mechanical, simple hydraulic actuators on a system that are just, they don't break, they're robust, they're not vulnerable.
So I actually think your instinct is right. I mean, because I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, yeah, we do have the privilege of dealing with some deep talent, right? We've got deep capabilities in these companies. And you got to focus on where are you going to go with that, right? And you got to get very particular and local. So, what I'm hearing from each of us is, I've got this portfolio and I'm going to connect some dots. And I'm going to find a way to offer a differentiated solution to a future customer. And I love the gardening analogy because I think all of us have had to choose some new areas, a little bit of crop rotation and also some investments that we know we're going to have to stick with for a long time in order to see them pay off. For me, it's the electric ship Navy.
Okay.
Right? The future Navy will have electric propulsion. But there's going to be a journey to get there. And I know I've got the know-how in Siemens to help the Navy get there. We're going to focus. It's going to be small for a while.
So the word I wished I'd used therefore was focus, right? One of the things these big small companies have to be is, if not having a narrow portfolio, you have a relatively diverse portfolio, each of you, but you have to be focused, or you have to bring focus to those select areas that you're going to try to succeed in. You're going to do your gardening in. Okay, I've been wanting to get to this question, which I'd prepared each of you for. I'm always interested in the captains of industry, in the captains, in not their biography, which Frank did a great job of recounting for us, but the why.
Yeah.
Each of you is a talented, smart person and could have done lots of other things, both at the beginning of your career and probably at various points in the middle of your career. Why do you do this? Why are you in this part of the business? What excites you about it, et cetera? Why don't we get back on track and start with Barbara?
Happy to. Yeah, Frank shared the story that I'm the daughter of two math professors. Cloudy Williams, anyone who took mathematics at the Virginia Military Institute may remember Cloudy. We lived on the corner of Maiden Lane and Letcher Avenue. I kid you not, in this hashtag generation. But it was right between...
Maiden Letcher.
Yeah, Maiden and Letcher, right between Washington and Lee and the Virginia Military Institute, which were both all-male institutions.
There you go.
But we got exposed to world leaders. I went off to Wake Forest University thinking that I would be a math professor like my parents. And my senior year, IBM came a-calling. They brought recruiters onto campus. And I had the chance, I thought, you know what, it'd be a good experience. Let me go to an interview. The interview was fascinating. Getting invited to Gaithersburg, Maryland, the most memorable question I was asked was, how many gas stations are there in the United States? So can I think, right? Can I work through a problem and take things apart and use data that I have to come to conclusions? I thought, wow, that's exciting. Well, I decided, what I told my parents is, I'll get into industry for a couple of years. That'd be a good experience. It'll make me a better professor. And I got into a project that I will just share with you, helped to end the Cold War. I was busy on that project when one day the chief engineer called all of us young programmers.
At IBM, you were at IBM.
At IBM, called all of us young programmers into a conference room and said, I need to tell you a story. The technology we've been delivering was used to save the life of a pilot who was shot down in enemy territory. And that pilot was my nephew. I was hooked. I mean, the idea of working on a national security mission that really touches our lives had me hooked. So I had the opportunity to go from there to working on the ground control segment of the global positioning system, and later working on border security with Customs and Border Protection. Oh man, what a mission they have. Then moving from that into biometrics, working hand in glove with the FBI, and introducing the idea of DNA, rapid DNA identification. These are technologies that are changing the world. So when I got the call from Siemens and looked at their portfolio and realized where this globe is headed, I just said, I want a front row seat. So here I am.
More world-changing stuff.
Someday I'm going to be a really good professor.
We'll look forward to that.
Thanks.
Andy, why do you do this?
So my father served in the Army. My uncles served in the Army. Grandfathers, uncles were in the Navy. So growing up, I just took it for granted that I'd serve. None of them were career. Served 3 years, 5 years. So it was just kind of the expectation. So I went to Nebraska Wesleyan, was the ROTC program. I was going to, serve 3 years in the Army, come back. My dad's an attorney. I was
just like Barbara, a couple of years and go be a professor.
A couple of years. I was going to come back, go to law school, my other uncle was in banking, and my other uncle was a doctor. So I was going to go to law school, go into banking, or be a doctor. So, but wanted to get, it just felt like, and I didn't really, I didn't give it a lot of thought. It was just kind of one of those things. It was maybe somewhat generational. But there was an expectation to serve 3 to 5 years, and so 11 years later I woke up, and it's like, son of a gun.
Still doing this.
I'm still doing this.
Go ahead, show us the inside of your the big red.
And look, frankly, if the Army would have let me stay in troop units and do nothing but stay in troop units, I'd have stayed in. Right. The
then you
problem
get to be
was
a major, field grade officer.
Well, you have to have this. You have to have this specialty. I had a knack for foreign languages, so I got assessed into the Foreign Area Officer program, and because I scored well enough on my language aptitude test, I had to study Russian. And so, 11 years into this as a Russian FAO, my next job was going to go to Siberia to count chemical warheads. And it was at that point in time that I thought,
That's the Army we know and love.
I love the Army, and I've given, and I'd love to stay around, but that just isn't what I want to do. So I got out and went back to business school at the University of Michigan, and it was the height of the dot-com bubble. I mean, there were 400 companies there recruiting, and I swore to myself, I'm not going to do anything with defense or the defense industry or have it in their name and their mission statement, any of that stuff. I'm going to break free, because if I come out of Michigan and I work for a defense company, I'll never get out.
Right.
And guess what? But
You know Warren, Michigan really well now, don't you?
Look, I had a tremendous opportunity for work for a guy that I have a great amount of respect for, Tom Rabbo, who, just as I was coming out of school, was taking United Defense out on a management buyout. And
the former FMC.
Right, it was FMC and BMY, and that was I admired him a lot. I got to know him while I was over in Saudi Arabia, teaching the Saudis how to use Bradleys, and you don't pass up on an opportunity to work for a guy like that. So I was very fortunate, and what has kept me in the business is, in those 30 years now that I've been on the industry side, and I'm fortunate enough to have been in the product delivery side of it. There hasn't been a single day go by that something hasn't come off a manufacturing line that I'm responsible for that then got fielded to someone who's a personal friend. And if you think about it, from 2001 to 2012, or now, 2001, 2018, we've been at war. And we've been sending soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines into harm's way. And every day I get up, I look at myself in the mirror and I shave, and it's like, I'm going to give somebody something better than what they have today, and it's going to save their life, let them do their mission better. And like I said, that's gone to folks who are my close personal friends, and now with my gray hair, increasingly their children, who also continue a great tradition in America of serving. If there's someone in the family that served, and that continued tradition of service. So that's why I do it. I've had opportunities to go to other industries, do other things, but whatever you always take professional pride in whatever you do. But to have this industry, I find, is unique, because it gives you that professional gratification, but it gives you a level of personal gratification and personal connection with your customer that I don't think any other industry has.
Beautiful. Brad.
So I went to the Air Force Academy, graduated a number of years ago, and have a degree in electrical engineering. I went into the Air Force, and I discovered that the Air Force wasn't so much about engineers, it was about fighter pilots, period, end of story, dot. So I probably should have figured that out ahead of time, but I did not. So I decided, I got out of the military, and I moved to San Diego. I worked at a microwave components house as a program manager, and I got recruited to Cubic. So I started at Cubic in 1989, actually managing program control stuff. So my job was to figure out if programs were going to get screwed up before they got screwed up, and tell the dude running the place so we could handle it. I very much enjoyed my time at Cubic. What was interesting about us as a company was that today we're 90% prime contractor, which is a little bit interesting given the size of our company. So we get to interact with customers all the time. There's a great opportunity to give back to the military, to field systems, to help people in harm's way. If we don't do a very good job, people's lives are in the balance. So that's fairly compelling. I think in our transportation business, if we don't do a good job, a lot of people's lives are inconvenienced. Their journeys just don't go well. And
For those of us here in Washington and the travail of the Washington metro system, I know what you're talking about.
just doesn't go well. So what we do actually does matter. I'll tell you a funny story around the kitchen table. My wife and I have been married 33 years, and yes, we only have 6 children. And
better get on with it.
yeah, that's it. And child number 4 goes to Villanova, and she's a chemical engineering freshman. So she was very glad by the basketball game, obviously.
Yep.
But she had her heart set on. She actually wanted to go to Service Academy to school. So she's fortunate. She's applied and been accepted both to the Naval Academy and the Air Force Academy. And you could kind of guess where I think she ought to go. But the thing that was interesting in the conversation, my kids will ask me, because I'm not all that handy around the house and whatever, they'll say, do you really use that engineering degree for what it is that you do? And the answer is we do, because we're involved in technology and solving problems, and you kind of have a feel. So I think the reason I keep doing what I do, I have passion to improve Cubic. I've been there, a while, so I have an idea of what's good and what needs to improve. I have our employees work tremendously hard. They're all around the world. They often have to work round the clock to put systems in. Some of that is perhaps because the system wasn't fully completed when we got it out to the field and had to go fix it. But so I have tremendous passion for our team and making things easier for them. I also have passion for our missions. I'm thrilled by the fact that I get to interact with Fingers as my classmate, so that's kind of interesting, and a chance to be able to give back to the military.
So each of these origin stories, if I may call them that, echoes strongly, or the other way around, in the points Frank was making by way of introducing each of you. It's interesting and I think helpful to understand why these are successful companies and the kind of companies that are in our industry. Let me come squarely to the matter at hand, how size matters to defense contracting. Let's start on the positive side of that. What's great about being in the middle? And now I am going to mix it up. We'll start now with Andy.
Great.
What's great about being in the middle of that barbell?
Well, I think it's the focus, which we have to have, and you can take advantage of it. We can stay focused on what we do. We are generally, and if we're not around for very long. But we have to be much more responsive, much more adaptive than the big guys, Our business, frankly, for AM General, both our commercial business and our military business, because we're a specialty niche automotive manufacturer, we operate in highly regulated markets. Mm-hmm. So you have to have a hurdle rate. You need to dedicate a certain amount of resources, a considerable amount of resources, just to do business in the business that we're in, and you're not big enough to get stovepiped into those kinds of things. You can't just have big, an organization here and a whole department and this. It's these businesses are incredibly lean, matrixed organizations that are highly adaptive, highly responsive to emerging market changes, and we go where our customer needs us to go. We're just, we generally don't sit on what's Boeing got, 5-6 years of backlog.
Right. But remember, this is what's great. And so what I'm hearing you say is what's great about being in the middle is focus, and there's sort of a palpable sense of the customer and the problem.
Yeah, look, there's a much, for a company of our size, we have more scale than a small company. We can do more things. We can solve more problems. We can take on very complex problems and deliver solutions to complex problems. I think I think from a capability point of view, and the ability to solve a problem, we're every bit as good as the really big guys. I wouldn't, my engineering staff, my systems engineers, my manufacturing team, my supply chain team, we can solve any problem that big guys can solve. We can solve them much quicker, and we have a much better ear for what the customer needs, because we're just closer. Our cycle time moves much quicker, and we have to adapt to the market much more quickly. And that's, it's on a refreshing cycle. It's exciting to work for companies this size because, you can move very quickly and you can solve really complex problems.
Okay. Brad, what's your take on what's great about being in the middle?
Well, you can't afford bureaucrats.
So you don't have many around.
And you have to have agility. Part of our strategy, we have key 5 points, but the first one is this notion of winning the customer. We flat out have to do better with the customer than anybody else. We have to be more responsive. We have to deliver the stuff early. We have to have faster innovation cycles. And we have to have empathy for our customers. I notice some big companies actually don't have empathy for their customers. They actually talk about how screwed up their customers might be. There's a lot of rules that our customers have to follow. I didn't create the rules. They have to follow these things. And so, we somehow have to work a way through all that and help our customers succeed. So I think we can absolutely focus and have attitude on winning the customer. When you think about going against a big company, a lot of this is playing chess. And it's who you're playing chess against. And, some of the big companies, I'll talk about training systems. Training systems is a division of a huge company. And we've got better talent than those people have, flat out. And we're more focused on delivering training systems than they are. They've got other things, platforms to worry about and so forth. So I believe that our nimble, agile, absolutely focused on the customer team can beat them and provide a better solution for the customer.
And that's great. Barbara, your take on the question?
Yeah, that is great. And actually, when you peel back the cover on a large company, what you discover is the work they take on is lots of small teams. So they deal with this too, except they don't have the short chain of command. In a smaller company, man, how many decisions have to be made before it's a go? And actually, you can move fast. But I'll share one other thing that we haven't touched on yet, and that is in the dynamic with customers. I think we're less threatening.
Okay.
Right? We're less threatening. I can tell you that when I come into the Pentagon, as Siemens, a door will open and it's come on in, sit down. I remember in previous generations, I would walk into a room and they'd say, "Excuse me, just a
Other
moment.
brands in your
I
your
need
resume.
to go get my lawyer." Right? I mean, it's just a fact of life that a small company like mine, when we talk about coming in and being partners, we have that ability. There's less of a barrier to building that relationship right from the get-go. I think that's an advantage.
Okay, very good. All right, let's turn the table. What's tough? What's particularly hard about being in this narrow band on the middle of the barbell? Brad, you'll go first this time. What's the hard part?
Well,
Hard part.
I think the obvious answer to that is scale, and I think, as you pointed out, we don't have a jillion consultants hanging around, and so
A head count for every program to do B&P on.
yeah, I mean, we have to decide if we're going to spend money on something. I think some of these big companies, I'm sure they think they decide, but they have a lot of room in their overheads and SG&A to go spend lots of money on things. So, we don't have the scale. So in our company, with these disparate businesses, our fifth point to our strategy has this idea of living one cubic. We used to have conglomerate management, and we had a president of this, and president of this, president of this. The people never talked to one another. There was no sharing. So this one cubic notion is the idea of smart sharing. So on the one hand, functions that are decentralized or functions that have to do with customer intimacy and delivering are decentralized and people run that. But kind of all the back office stuff, kind of the manufacturing, the procurement, the supply chain, we've centralized all of that. When I changed jobs a few years ago, believe it or not, we had 110 disparate IT systems and thought that was good.
In little cubic.
And thought that was good. So now we're moving everything onto SAP. The wheels have not fallen off of the company, thank God, and we're moving along. And we will have all the data in one place. And I think that will be very powerful to increase our agility more and more and more. But it was a big investment for us. I mean, it's a lot of money. So I think scale is the obvious answer, the disadvantage that we have.
And that manifests itself in cash flow and just human resources.
When we go, and probably not a great example, but when we go to Farnborough, we don't make airplanes, of course. We have a little thing there, and we hope people will show up. I think some of these big companies have a village, and
It takes a village.
Yeah, I mean they have. I mean, it's unbelievable how much money they spend
like
on
that?
this.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
so
that
it's just resources that they can. It's SG&A resources. Now, Barbara, what's the hard part? from your
Listen, I'm
perspective?
going to be the contrarian here. I wouldn't trade this for anything.
Well, that came through right from the go.
No, seriously.
But are there aspects in which you feel? I think, Brad, I heard your answer to be we have to try harder at certain things than other companies do. Let me change my question. What are the things you have to be better at than you otherwise would be if you were either smaller or bigger?
Hey, this portfolio management deal is a big deal.
Okay.
Right, because
Again, a little abstract for everybody. Portfolio management. You mean?
we're talking about there are certain parts of the business that are thriving at any given time, and other parts where you're making an investment and you want to be able to hang in there for the long haul so that this thing will actually take hold. So building a business plan that is going to really be able to fund the team and keep everything healthy while new strategies emerge. In a larger portfolio, I hear you, Brad. In a larger portfolio, as we all do, as we make our own investments, right? You can have more failures and have less risk, downside risk. But then, I'll just share with you all, this has been the really fascinating thing about being the SSA for a very large
Explain
company.
that, please. Explain that.
Our company is a U.S. entity. We hold a special security clearance, a special security agreement with Defense Security Services so that we can operate as a U.S. entity.
With a German parent.
My preferred supplier is the Siemens Corporation based in Germany. And so the really fascinating thing about this has been that I've actually engaged them in this discussion of when do we want to divest for very good reasons. We just divested a piece of our business to Curtiss-Wright,
Okay.
where they are a better match for the technology and taking this forward for the Navy than we are. So this portfolio
Okay.
management and deciding where you want to go next and placing those bets.
Focus. You have to be very deliberate, and more often than not, you have to be right, or you can't succeed.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Andy.
You don't. You don't have 100 different bets on the table. You got a few.
Right.
And you can't lose many of them. You lose one or two, you can't lose very many. And other than that, I mean, being a CEO, is frankly, an easy job, right? There's only 5 things you have to do: set a vision, define a strategy to achieve the vision, build a team, communicate with shareholders and stakeholders and your employees, and deliver results. But
Just that.
That's it.
That's it.
Just those.
So there's really no downside as far as I'm
just
hearing.
those, just those 5 things. It's a nice little, neat manageable package, it's exciting. The only thing that bugs me is having to do my own dishes, my own PowerPoint slides. But those are the days.
All right, so those are the
I wish,
downsides.
those are the days I wish I was one of the really big companies. But other than that, it's all good.
Okay. I want to move to the next concentric circle, which is the customer. The customer presents itself to you and other companies with at least 2 different hats on. One is they are the buyers and maybe ultimately the end users. They're also, in some sense, the regulators. And if we could have the conversation in those 2 pieces. Let's start with the easy piece, which is how's the buying environment that you're experiencing, and is there anything peculiar to your scale that presents the buyers and the things they want and the amount of money they're going to spend to you in distinct ways? I think we're back around now. Now I think we're at Brad. No, we're at Barbara.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
So
So
and then we'll get to how they want to buy things and how that may bear differently on your scale companies than others.
That's
but,
right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, listen, everybody in this business has been struggling with this uncertainty of, what do we do with a customer who can't plan because they don't have certainty of
Right.
what their budgets are going to be. Okay. Noted, stated. The thing that we've been doing is working hard to make sure that we've got the right vehicles so that people can get to us.
Contract vehicles.
Contract vehicles. Try to be holding contract vehicles where it's easy for customers to press the easy button. Now,
Once they've got an appropriation.
Right. So I'm dealing with customers who basically need to run installations, or customers who are on multi-year development programs. And so, in a certain sense, there is a layer of this government that just continues to rock and roll and do what needs to be done. And so what's been important for us is to be there for them and make sure that they have ways to get their jobs done.
Yep.
It's been very difficult in areas where we say, hey, here's a new concept that needs to be introduced because we're all on this roller coaster ride of when can we get there.
Is there a palpable difference in the buying posture of the customer since the bipartisan, I forget exactly what it's being called, but the 2-year relief in the caps, not to mention the big omnibus appropriations? Is that palpable in the marketplace now?
A lot of talk right now that
Okay.
everyone needs to be ready for what is going to be a surge like we've never seen before.
Over the next 5 months of putting stuff on contract.
Right. Oh, we got more than we imagined we would.
Yep.
We've got to be responsible for this. How are we gonna put this on contract? So that's the sprint that we're
Andy,
going to have.
what's the temperature of the customer these days?
Look, I would say it's getting better, far better than it's been in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
But when production shuts down on my line, within 5 minutes of the production shutdown, the plant manager gets a call if the line supervisor hasn't solved it. Within 10 minutes, my chief operating officer gets a call if it's not up and running again. Within 15 minutes, I get a call. We have a level of urgency.
Is that because there's a DCAA or a PM
it's
on the floor?
No, because I'm losing money every minute
Right.
that the line's not running. All due respect to DCAA,
Yes.
they're great
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
Not
Let
my
the record
motivation.
show.
Our focus. I was a battalion motor officer in an Army unit. And I've stood knee deep in mud changing engines. Right. So
No fun.
There's a level of urgency from us on the production side, and a level of urgency for the actual users. And while things are getting better, I don't see the level of urgency in the appropriating dollars, defining requirements, appropriating dollars against that requirements, getting those dollars obligated to the requirement and under contract and delivered. In that span, there's not a sense of urgency.
There are probably a lot of people in those jobs who, when you think about the duration of going on 7 or 8 years that we've been through this
But-
don't know what this is like.
I think you got, you get a little bit numb to it, and it's, there's a government shutdown, there's no money, there's sequestration, the reason we react so quickly to a line shutdown is because it is incredibly disruptive all the way through the business. And it's not just coming off the line. It screws up cash flow, it screws up supplier material, it screws up labor planning. I mean, just incredibly disruptive. And so for the past 10 years, we've been dealing with kind of that defining a requirement, getting something on contract and delivered, incredible amount of disruption all across that value chain. It's getting better, but there's still far too much disruption in that process, and disruption wastes taxpayer dollars, and it denies soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines the equipment they need to do what we ask them to do each and every day. So getting better, but I think we got a long way to go.
I wonder if I can sort of tack on to the question for your purpose, Brad, whether the nimbleness, I forget that was the term that you all were using, that these big small companies have, is that going to be an advantage in a market environment where they got to put money on contract fast and they're going to have a lot of it to spend?
Well, the answer to that is of course.
Of course, yes. But tell me more. Why? Really?
Well, contracting is not a simple process. There are a lot of people who can say no they have a whole book of reasons to say no.
Right.
And so our job is to figure out how to make it easy for them and to get
Empathetically even,
and get whatever the proper documentation is so that contracting officers can put things under contract. So we've moved. We're really glad that there's a budget. We're glad that the Congress finally did its job. That's very good. Now we've moved into contracting officer land, and time will tell how many things they get under order. I understand that there's reprogramming rules, make it a little bit easier when they don't get all the money under contract. It's like that garden hose. It's moved. So time will tell. Fortunate for us, we're not 100% dependent on the Department of Defense. Transport for London is running fine. They know how to do contracts.
Yeah.
In our transportation business, we've been very fortunate. These equipment that allows us to collect $20 billion for our customers each year are going through upgrade cycles. It happens every 10 or 15 years. So we were fortunate to win in New York City recently. We won in Boston. We're working in Brisbane. There's a deal in San Francisco. And they're big deals for us. And so that's a lot easier to manage, quite frankly, than a contracting officer wanting X, Y, and Z. In addition to that, we have diversity in our revenue streams. Believe it or not, about 40% of our revenue is outside the United States. And so those revenue streams go up from different cycles. So we do have some piece of our business, particularly in our C4ISR area, where the get money to ship cycles are pretty short. And so we're doing everything we can to get those orders across the line and get that revenue. And we have people laser focused on it for that to happen. So in general, it's very good. The government is somewhat dysfunctional at putting things under contract. It's our job to help them.
Yeah, but it's interesting to me. I mean, this is an inflection point, this appropriation. It's very interesting to me. You don't have to comment on my editorial here that they are not saying happy days are here again. And that's interesting to me.
Until you have it in backlog.
Okay, yeah.
Until you have it in backlog, you're just talking.
Okay. I am at risk of cheating the audience out of Q&A. I realize we just have 15 minutes left, so if a hand goes up right away, I will take it. Good on you. And if it didn't, I had another question. So there's a question in the back row, and we'll go from there to this gentleman in the row just in front of him. Please stand up, identify yourself.
Sure. Thank you. Kyle Ennis, Georgetown University. One of the things I hear a lot about is tech transfer. Obviously, that's a very big deal out of DoD, but I'm originally from transportation as a background, and DOT worries about the same thing. So one of the things I'd really like to hear you speak a bit more about is scaling technology or nurturing technology, especially as you are companies that don't operate within one specific silo way some of the other players do.
Yeah, so we're an innovation company, and we're very interested in developing new things. And in fact, we have a platform where we collect ideas from employees, and we have a process to where we make little bets and then bigger bets. We try to make our bets according to a portfolio approach, long-term, short-term, incremental, and game changer. We try to make bets to improve the businesses. Not everything turns out perfect. There's failure along the way. But, we can annoy a lot of customers by, having a standoff with them over intellectual property. My philosophy is just keep developing new things, staying out ahead in our various areas. And I get less bothered by, we try to cut shrewd deals, don't try to give everything away, but
Don't get stuck
we're always developing new things. So we always have something better, actually, than we're offering.
So the intersection of commercial technology with defense needs and requirements and solutions is one of the long recurring themes now in this Captains of Industry series. And so it's an aspect of the question that was asked, and I want to take a little bit more time on it, particularly from you, Barbara. Right? You are in a company with some of the world's great commercial solutions to complex problems. How's that play? And are there particular difficulties introducing it to not just the U.S. government, but to the U.S. Department of Defense?
If Siemens only knew what Siemens knows, that's a mantra that you hear often within our company.
Within the company.
Within the company.
A little more tech transfer within the company.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Those small teams are digging deep in some mission area, and it's hard for them to find the forums to get up and out and start sharing what they know with others. So that takes work. And Brad, that's inspirational. The way you're doing that. But I'll share with this audience that watch this space, because there's a transformation about to happen with the digitalization of manufacturing, actually with the digitalization of the entire creative chain, from concept through design to manufacturing, et cetera. I predict what we're going to see is a real shift in who has the intellectual property rights, how are they exploited. What if I could tell you we're inventing the Spotify of additive manufacturing, where people can download their designs and do manufacturing anywhere in the world? Well, that's a game changer.
Yeah.
So I actually think it's a fantastic launch question. You could do a whole series
that
just
space.
on this.
Okay.
This is going to get exciting.
Let's see if we can get 2 or 3 or 4 questions in within the next 10 minutes. We'll take this question here, and then this gentleman, and then we'll come back to you. Go ahead.
I'm Mike Stone from Reuters, and I wanted to ask, the president has criticized Amazon by name in a series of tweets over the past few days. Wanted to know if you guys each were talking about your supply chain. There's been some tariffs that have been announced, other proposals. If you were to speak up and try and push back against those, would you be afraid of any backlash?
And your business is as close to steel and aluminum as any of the 3 of you here. Do you want to take that question?
No, I'm not worried about any backlash. There clearly has to be a balance between the recognized fact that we live in a global world, we operate in a global economy, but if we cannot produce steel in the United States, that's a national security problem. It just is. And if you don't believe, I would recommend everybody in the room read a book called Freedom's Forge.
Say
Freedom's Forge.
Freedom's Forge, yes.
The U.S. was in June of 1940. So there's a movie on Dunkirk and Winston Churchill and all that. At that moment, the Germany and Japan were producing 100 times as much steel as the United States. We're coming off the Depression. We had very few active steel plants and even fewer aluminum plants running at the time. We were at that point in time building about 30 tanks a year. The U.S. Army wanted 300 a year. The Brits wanted another 300 a year, and we didn't have enough steel production to even address that problem. I'm not saying that we're going to go into another global war, but there are some basics, right? Steel, aluminum, machine tools. If you don't have those things, you don't have a defense industry.
But there are good ways to get that.
Right.
And listen, at Siemens, we are all about global trade. So that's my very frank. And we're on the record with the CEO of Siemens globally making comments about that. And,
Let's take this question from the gentleman right or here, I think is where my question next went. Stand up, please.
Hi there, Dave Buffalo. I'm a former Army guy who's now under that protection of the small, so I'm not in this, the space that you have. One thing that Frank mentioned and Andy mentioned, as far as what's most important is having vision. And I'm just curious, at the place where you are, that mid-size or big small level, what is your vision for your company, your long-term visions for where you want to go? Is it to become a big? Is it to be acquired by a big? Is it to diversify? Or just get really good at what you do?
That's I love that question. Well, where do you go from here? Is this the right spot? Is there a natural evolution, opportunistically? Brad. And then we'll come all the way around. I'm interested in each of your answers to this. Where do you go?
So I've stated publicly that we're at $1.5 billion. We're trying to get to $2 billion by the year 2020. We've stated that the margins would be better. We've stated that we would continue to have a portfolio of market-leading businesses. So we're very focused on that. I think as long as we can continue to win, we should continue to be separate and prosper and
Big small is sustainable.
I think it is. I mean, we're winning, so we just keep winning.
Yep. Okay.
I think it's all about winning.
To coin a phrase, Barbara.
How big is big? So, we've chosen some markets that we want to serve, and we have this amazing resource behind it of the Siemens Corporation. So, electric propulsion. How big could that be? I'm going to say we're going to be as big as these markets lead us to. Our focus is going to take us to the right size.
Okay, so paced by the markets you've chosen to focus on. Andy?
Yeah, so my vision is total global dominance.
Excellent. I expected nothing less. That'll suffice. Let's grab another question. I'm not going to even let you amplify that. Right there.
Hi, Rob Levinson, Bloomberg Government. Andy, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned how you're part of an automotive universe that's much bigger on the commercial side. Well, of course, the hottest thing on the commercial side with automotive now is self-driving cars. And I want to know how, if any way, is that influencing your business, your technology?
Yeah, get a lot of mathematicians.
I can help you here.
Unmanned aerial vehicles are almost ubiquitous, right? The math to do that is frankly pretty simple. Pretty straightforward, right? It goes up, flies on a plane, comes back down. On driving on it's much more complex navigating a vehicle on the ground. I mean, you run into stuff that you don't run into in the air, and it's relatively straightforward to design the algorithms and the sensor combinations to drive a vehicle on street rules. On a street with the yellow lines, white lines, everybody else following the rules of the road. The next big hurdle they got to get over is how to do all that when it's snowing, raining, all that kind of stuff. Military situation is completely different. There are no rules, there are no roads, and one of the biggest difficulties in applying that to military application is detecting negative obstacles. And so that ledge in front of me is about
8 inches, 10?
About 8-10 inches. So I'm driving along in a military vehicle, and I come up and I see that with my little sensor package up on the front grill. How do I know that that's 10 inches or 10 feet?
Right.
And,
Although there are certain cities where even you have to worry about that dimension as well.
yeah, I am kind of hand waving the pothole thing, but
I'm going to squeeze one more question in, but anything else on autonomy?
I'll speak a
Brad?
little bit about that. We get asked that question about how autonomous vehicles will affect how people move around in cities.
Right.
And what effect it has with mass transit,
Sure.
to kind of frame the question. The issue around the world in our country is there's not enough surface area of roads. And so the density of people that you can put in an autonomous vehicle, you're going to need some mass transit to be able to move people, as many people as we have in cities efficiently, because quite frankly, there's not enough pavement. The fact that our country has not raised the gas tax for a long, long time actually presents an opportunity to us in the sense of, I think some tolling schemes will be used in the future, some road usage schemes, and we're pursuing that hard. So we actually think autonomous vehicles is an opportunity for us.
And to facilitate then the financing of the infrastructure, you need to accommodate all these little autonomous vehicles. Last question, and then I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give us a capstone thought.
Paul Murphy, Bloomberg Government. We actually study mid-tier companies quite a bit over at our shop, and we're just down the street, and we appreciate the opportunity to participate here. My question is, are there aspects of the U.S. procurement process that would facilitate doing business as a mid-sized company that you would like to see implemented? And conversely, are there aspects of your work overseas that you would like to see the U.S. Government adopt to help particularly mid-sized firms?
Perfect. It's a question I had to curtail myself asking to get the cue in. So thank you very much. Exactly that. Andy?
So we operate on a global scale. We do business in over 70 countries. We're just there's no way that that's all going to get aligned, right? Those guys aren't going to all start doing business the same way. What they can all strive for is more continuity and consistency, and not turning the spigot on and off, right? So, as I said before, the U.S. has, I think, still some work that they can do in that. Our international customers have work in that they can get there, but it's on us as business to adapt to the environments that we see. We can't just sit back and wish we're going to only operate in one environment. We're going to figure it out, and we're going to figure it out a lot quicker if there's more consistency and continuity in whatever the acquisition process is, wherever it is.
So I'm going to come now to Barbara, and I just wonder if we can take Andy's answer down to a slightly closer focus. What could government do that would allow them to take better advantage of all these great strengths of big, small companies?
I'm hearing some good things out of DoD now, where they've got an interest in allowing alternative authorities, et cetera. So
Okay.
some things that we think have promise, and we're bullish
Sort
on
of
that.
non-FAR or
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Right. So, hey, open up that aperture, because there's a world of opportunity available to our customers if they can tap into that. So acquisition has been scary for a decade or more. It doesn't need to be that scary. And the only other thing I'll add to this conversation is I'm a real believer in public-private partnership, and there's more that we can be doing off balance sheet. There's more that private investors would be willing to bring to the table so that we use these precious dollars for mission capability that commercial companies don't
Like
bring.
the energy savings performance contracts that
Bingo.
you were talking about
Yeah.
before. Brad, how could the customer take better advantage of you big, small companies?
Yeah, we have to adapt to win, and so whatever, it's a constrained optimization problem and how to win. But I'd say broadly, the procurement system, we need to greatly improve cycle time. I think the time frames from requirements to when things go under contract is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think I'm also hearing good things in the department working on that. But in industry, we don't say, we're going to buy this in 3 years, and that would be silly season, right? We figure it out very quickly. We figure out who the best in the world is at it. We negotiate a deal, pick the best one, and we get on with it. And we don't write specs, that are tomes. We, write down a few cardinal points. Human beings can't, so I think...
and then do your due diligence, but not necessarily in paperwork.
It's usually pretty obvious who the best in the world at something is. You usually can figure that out. You have smart people, they can figure it out. I think there's such a emphasis on fairness versus getting capability in warfighters' hands that I think a lot of procurement spends time avoiding protests than they do at getting kit in the hands of people that need it.
And larger companies that have the margins of money and time can better adapt to that buying environment than big, small companies.
Except they're slow.
But maybe that's part of their adaptation, but let's leave it there. This is exactly what we do at Captains of Industry. This has been a great conversation. I think it has elucidated what I was hoping for here, which is life in the middle. Good, bad, and I didn't really hear anything too ugly. It's mostly good and challenging. But you all seem oddly to relish actually the very challenging parts of it, which I think is what I also heard in your origin stories was why you do it. A capstone thought to send us off into the evening, Barbara?
Yeah, we're resourceful. You've heard it, right? We're in this because this is where we can make a huge contribution, and we're finding ways to get it done despite all of the constraints.
Andy, thank you.
Yeah, look, I'd certainly echo that. It's our customers, and mostly military, but we build handicap accessible vehicles, postal service vehicles. We focus on, the mailman, the mail person delivering mail. We focus on, family with a quadriplegic child getting to their medical appointment. We focus on, the soldier standing in 4 inches of mud, changing the engine. And as long as we maintain that focus, we're going to find interesting, compelling things to do that makes sense for our business. And there's absolutely no shortage of that kind of unique problem for us to solve. So it's exciting every day.
Thank you, Andy. And Brad?
It's all about winning and providing the very best solution to the customer.
And thank you. And thank you all for coming. Let's thank the panel.